Great. Hi, everybody. We are again live. It is Sunday, 8th of October, and a lot of things are happening, Brian. What is happening? It was all quiet over there in Israel, and overnight, it's like it's unbelievable. We thought that Israel was the one of the strongest army in the world. Uh, how did it happen, Brian?
Well, that's the big question, and I think that's what's raising a lot of suspicions for people who are a little more skeptical, and for people who are a little bit more objective. They're looking at this and they're wondering, how could this possibly happen? This is the only thing that Israel does, is focus on containing the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. How did this happen? Also, with this amount of preparation, arms, and ammunition from Palestine, obviously there was some sort of state sponsor. There has to be. They're not making Kalashnikovs and anti-tank rockets anywhere in Palestine. So where did all of this come from? And Kubono, who benefits most from all of this? This is what we have to ask ourselves. We also have to ask ourselves, despite the situation, and I'm someone who finds the things that Israel does deliberately provocative, inhumane, and inexcusable. But then we have to look at the true nature of the opposition, those opposing Israel. There's a variety of groups. Some of these groups are good and worthy of support, and others are questionable, and others are not. And we have to separate all of this out, and we cannot be tempted to reduce this to good and bad and knee-jerk reactions driven by emotions. So what happened was there were these attacks, large-scale attacks from out of Palestine into Israel, is territory Israel claims as Israeli. And they've been going into towns, villages, along roadways. There's reports that they're taking hostages, military hostages, but also civilian hostages, which I think is something that would be very difficult to try to justify. No matter what Israel does, being as bad as Israel is not the way you're going to solve this problem. And now Israel is retaliating, relying heavily on air power, destroying targets inside the Gaza Strip, West Bank. And they've also hit southern Lebanon already. So there's this big cycle of violence kicking off yet again, and we have to look at how this fits into the larger geopolitical picture. So I don't know if you want to go, add some things that you have been seeing, Angelo, or you want to explore how the kind of the history behind this, maybe.
Yeah, I think this might not please some of our friends, pro-Palestinians. They are actually they are listening to what they want to hear. I think it's convenient to say, well, you have Hamas on one side, and they're actually humiliating the IDF, the Israelis, and I think this is that's the problem we might have, is that it pleases to their ears, but we need to be extremely skeptical. I think it's healthy to ask ourselves questions. You see, even the interpretation of 9/11 here, after so many years, we have a different understanding. It is too early. I want to point out, it's extremely important. Here, we might do some speculation, just speculation. This is with what we have in our hands. We usually don't like to have, to be in the heat, in the middle of the heat. We like to review a bit later, but I think it's important, maybe to jump in and maybe do some a bit of speculation. I think again, we need to look at
Angelo, maybe a good place to start is that video clip you sent to me earlier today. And when I see something like this, I do speculation internally, and I use that to kind of guide my analysis, create a hypothesis, look for evidence that supports it. And that was one of my hypotheses, if that's the plural of hypothesis. And maybe you could explain that video that you sent me. And I'm curious where that came from, what the source of that video was also.
Okay, so she's a journalist. She's an Israeli journalist. I actually posted that video on my channel, and well, she's saying, I mean, she's saying things that, I mean, are quite obvious. How did this happen? To give you an example, if you have a cat just going close to the border, you know, they would identify a small cat going, you know, I mean, there's so much intelligence. There's so much, and actually, it seems like there was a diversion of forces, not on towards the Gaza Strip, but more on the West Bank. There are many indicators that says, well, how did they let this happen? And again, you know, I gave you just one example. When you have a kid in Gaza that is throwing a stone, within an hour they find this kid and they arrest him. I mean, there's so much intelligence there. Now, this is an operation of not a dozen Hamas militants. We are talking about probably 1,000. How did you manage to get the weapons in? How did you manage to get all the training? They have spies within Hamas, and so on and so on. In addition to that, I have my question about Hamas. And this is not convenient I know pro-Palestinians will not like to hear that. But Hamas, you know, the whole creation of Hamas was actually was promoted by the Israelis because in front of them they had Arafat. Arafat wanted to go towards peace solution, 2 states. Not saying he was a good person. I won't judge the person, but he wanted to compromise. If it was a secular state, he wanted to do modern state. Now, for Israel, it was a convenient enemy to have Hamas, because Hamas, there was a religious connotation. It was behind the Hamas was the Muslim Brotherhood.
Muslim Brotherhood, yes.
Exactly. And we know the Muslim Brotherhood, they were behind all those color revolutions, and the US was behind them, supporting them. So again, we need to be extremely careful. How did this happen? And in that video, this woman, she's pro-Israeli, she's, you know, pro-Zionism, but she says clearly, she's saying, well, this is an insider job. I'm not saying it's an insider job. It's a bit early, but it sounds fishy, very, very fishy. I just want to point out one more thing. In 1967, there was a 6-day war. Israel was not as strong as it is today in 1967. In 6 days, they beat 6 Arab armies. 6. It was a huge humiliation. Now you have thousands of Hamas soldiers that they go 30 kilometers inside occupied territories.
Very suspicious.
Fishy, very suspicious. Very suspicious.
I'm looking for the map. If I find it, maybe we can share it on the screen.
I have a latest map actually.
Okay. All right, then. Yeah, then share that.
Well, you know, this is actually. I want to point out it comes from a pro-Palestinian channel. So you know, again, we
take
need
it with a yeah.
Okay, so let's see if I.
Yeah, and as you're doing what you're saying about Hamas, you have many groups that are opposed to what Israel does. You have yes, and that actually looks very similar to what I've seen on.
It looks close to the West Bank. They are so much advanced there. They are close to the West Bank. You know where they fought? They fought in Ashkelon. Ashkelon, I checked.
It's like up north, actually, also, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's a city of 150,000 inhabitants. Well, you know how it is in Israel. You have most of young people under 30. I don't know which age, but they are all reservists. Many of them have weapons. Why they didn't even defend themselves? I mean, you know, we are not talking about 10,000 soldiers. I don't know. Do you have a figure? I have a figure on how many deaths. You know, we're talking about the latest count is 500 Israeli deaths. But how many soldiers took part in this operation from the
Yeah,
from
it has to be thousands. It has to be
thousand?
thousands for them to be overwhelming the local security. And something else mentioned in that video that you shared with me earlier, Angelo, was that some of the Israeli forces that are usually defending different checkpoints and security positions, they were for some reason moved right before all of this happened. So that, if that's true, again, we have to confirm all of this. This is not verified, but if that's confirmed, then that sounds like. And think about all of this. Hamas who was backing Hamas? You had, I think you have different factions, because you have parts of it that are infiltrated by Israel. Admittedly, you have U.S. allies across the Arab world who were backing Hamas. Keep that in mind, and with that comes U.S. support, indirectly funneled through these Arab allies. And then we hear that Iran is supporting Hamas, but I don't think in general there's probably a specific faction, or maybe not Hamas, but some militant group in Palestine that Iran supports. We do know that they have a close relationship with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is a completely different organization than Hamas. I don't even think you can really compare the two.
No.
So you keep that in mind. Keep in mind that Hamas in, I believe it was 2013, actually joined in support of the U.S.-led proxy war against Syria. They were in Syria fighting Syrian forces, the Syrian Arab Army, Hezbollah, Iranian forces, and Russian forces until 2017. So keep that in mind. Think about that as well. And since 2017, they've tried to repair the relationship with Syria, but I don't know what the status of that is, or how deep those repairs have been. And think about this. You have everyone in the Middle East, everyone else in the Middle East repairing ties with each other. Saudi Arabia with Iran. Syria's been normalized. They're being brought back into the fold. China's thinking about helping them rebuild. The people that were part of this U.S.-driven strategy of tension since the end of World War II, which centered on Israel as a forward operating base of U.S. and before that British ambitions in the region, those people who are a part of that process, they have no future. The people in Hamas who are a part of it, the people in Israel who are a part of it, even the people perhaps in Saudi Arabia who are a part of that, a deep part of that, they have no future in the Middle East that is emerging, one where there's peace and stability, and these people have no role in it. They're going to be demilitarized. They're going to be, their power is going to be shifted elsewhere, someplace more constructive. So did they all just decide to get together and sabotage this process so that they could just keep this going? And that was another point made in that video, that journalists suspected that people both in Israel and somewhere in Hamas were conspiring to advance some sort of agenda at the expense of both the Israeli and Palestinian people, and also low-level Hamas fighters who think they're fighting for a good cause. So these are all things to keep in mind as this unfolds, to keep track of. I don't know if there's something else you wanted to add to that, Angela.
I just I'm putting actually the video on the chat. So people, if you can, and I'll put in the video description at the end of the video. I just want to, maybe we could talk about Israel, Netanyahu, recent event. What's the position of Israel? Because again, what surprises me in general is that Israel has not put itself in a completely aligned position when it comes to the US recently. Okay, Israel is trying to mend ties in the region. So it has, again, it's a good thing maybe for the peace in the region. I don't know about the Palestinian question, but I think what the counterparts, in exchange, what the Arab world would want from Israel is to find a solution, and somehow, I think a first step to trade together, to do things together, to slowly talk to each other is a good thing. Then we have So when it comes to sanctions with Russia, Russia has a good relationship with Israel. Now
So does China. So does China too,
that's
by the
China.
way. Yes.
And then you have the US, which has a really bad relationship lately. I mean, if you take into account that Israel, I mean, they're brothers, basically brothers. Israel has been an extension of the US, but now recently, and I think it's not only the US. We talk about especially the Biden administration, and they don't like where Netanyahu is going. Like Netanyahu or not, just not taking any side here. Then Netanyahu has some problem internally, and I think the problem he has internally are actually influenced by external elements. And we saw, the son of Netanyahu has been tweeting a lot about this, exposing Open Society of George Soros. So that means that maybe Israel might want to take a different path. And that actually goes back to the discussion we had. Remember, we had a discussion maybe a year ago about this, that there's a misconception of people. People tend to say, and I think it's too simplistic, to say, well, Israelis control the US. And we think it's exactly the opposite. It is actually the US has been using Israel as a tool, as a platform to destabilize the Middle East, same as they are doing with Ukraine. So it's not Ukraine controlling the US, it's the US using Ukraine, where Israel is the same. Israel is a pawn, and maybe Netanyahu has a different view, because he knows that the world is changing. And believe me, I don't like this guy. It's disgusting what they're doing to the Palestinians, but somehow is putting his country first. And I do believe that comes back to the discussions we had many times, that this multipolar world, issues like the Palestinian issue will be solved. Why? Because Israel won't have Big Brother on his back. All those conflicts, why do they exist? Because there's a divide and control. And every time you have the US, which is siding with one side or the other, and once you have US as Big Brother that is siding with you, you take a stronger stance, and you actually start behaving like the Baltic states, what I call the Chihuahua states, right? Why they barking? Those small states of 2 million people, they're barking at China, barking at Russia. Why? Because they have the US on their back. Well, now maybe Israel is thinking, we won't have forever the US, and they think that the world is changing, is shifting. So again, there's two questions. One is about Israel and what it is doing for its own interest, and then the other one is the Palestinian question. Again, it's not. So it's two different topics. Somehow, we are analyzing the posture of Israel, and then somehow again we think that the Palestinian question could be solved. Because Israel, ultimately, if we are going to this multipolar world, it's going to be about how you can trade together, how you integrate economies together, and how you can build up a peaceful environment. And somehow this will change cultures, this will change attitudes, this will change how countries will interact with each other. And I'm hopeful
very quickly also.
Yeah, I do think miracles can happen in Israel too. That doesn't excuse that it is still a racist apartheid state, and it's inhumane what they are doing to Palestinians. But I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back there. But it's important just to look at Israel as its own interest, and maybe what Netanyahu is trying to do with Israel.
So you had a super chat actually, and it said Israel's a disposable U.S. client state in the end. I absolutely agree with that, and a lot of people think that it's impossible for this to happen. That someday Israel is going to find itself alone. The United States is not sponsoring them, supporting them, backing them up, and they will have a decision to make. Are they going to continue down this path, which I would call self-destructive, or will they adopt a more sane, dignified, humane foreign policy where they live in peace and cooperation with their neighbors. And people say, well, that's crazy. That will never happen. This has been going on forever. It hasn't been going on forever. It's something that has been relatively a relatively recent conflict. Jews and Muslims have lived together in peace throughout history. The largest Jewish community in the Middle East outside of Israel is actually in Iran, and people can go look that up. That is a fact. And so this has been done artificially. This is what the British Empire had begun, but it was a fading empire. The US took the torch and ran forward with this project, and they created Israel as a foothold in the region. And Israel isn't, people who are hyper-focused on Israel, tunnel vision on Israel, they do not see that the US does this in absolutely every other region of the world too. They're doing it in Taiwan. They're doing it in Ukraine. You have people who are connected to Ukraine in the US government. And just as you say, Angelo, it's not because Ukraine has captured the United States and is using the US to advance their interests in Ukraine. It's because the US is an empire. An empire has an imperial court, if you will, and the modern day imperial court comprises of lobbyists. So you have these lobbyists. That is how they interface with the US, the circles of interest that drive the US. Now, there's a couple of other things I wanted to say. You were talking about how things are changing. Multipolarism is emerging, and there's no more use for these projects that the US has created. The US is unable to sustain them. We just saw Saudi Arabia and Iran. This was unthinkable. This is something I didn't think would happen for years, if not decades, but it is something that is already happening. Why? Because Russia and China are transforming the region. How are they doing that? How are they transforming the region? They are being objective. They're being more or less neutral. They're working with absolutely everyone on both sides of every conflict. So if you Google or whatever your search engine of choice is, Russia's most recent statement on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they're not picking any side. They want people to cease fire, stop, and sort this out through means other than armed conflict. China, I'm looking at Bloomberg. China reiterates two-state solution needed for Israel-Palestine. And they're talking about ceasefire, and they're not picking sides. They have a relationship with Israel. They have a relationship with Palestine. They have a relationship with nations that support and help Palestine, Iran, for example. So we have to keep all of this in mind. It's very unhealthy for people who take these absolute positions where they say, I support Palestine, they can't do anything wrong, and I want Israel wiped off the map, which will never happen. It's unrealistic. I don't think that that's going to happen. And people who support Israel, likewise, very unreasonable. They say Israel should just steamroll over Palestine and wipe out the Arabs, which was part of the mindset of the war on terror for many years. People remember that. Also unrealistic, impossible, cannot happen. Israel cannot even push to the Litani River in southern Lebanon. So they're not taking over the Middle East militarily, not militarily. And so I saw a comment in the comment section. They asked, what side are we on? I'm not on either side. I want Israel to stop its inhumane treatment of Palestine. I want to see Palestine have sovereignty, peace, and stability. I would like them to not be tormented and humiliated by the policies of Israel. I also don't want to see Israel annihilated. Its creation was unjust, but that was a long time ago. There are people who were born there who had nothing to do with that, and they should not pay for those bad decisions. This can all be fixed. It can all be fixed. It will be fixed. I guarantee you it'll be fixed. And I guarantee you it'll be Russia and China who are the ones to fix it. The U.S. always played peacemaker, but it was always disingenuous. They were deliberately sabotaging peace while also pretending to promote peace. And it was part of this strategy of tension and keeping it going. I also saw a comment say, Israel, they're not saints, but at least they don't kill civilians and take pictures with the dead bodies. But they do. Both sides do incredibly inhumane inexcusable things to the other side. That is part of a strategy of tension. You create extremism and animosity, blind people from their ability to reason, and then you get you get a very predictable type of violence that you can use for all sorts of geopolitical ends. And the US has used it for all sorts of geopolitical ends. They actually got Hamas to go fight in Syria, as I mentioned. They actually got them to do that because they are so blind with hate and rage and extremism. They're not able to consciously make rational choices, which contrasts greatly with Hezbollah. So let's see. I'm going to look through the comments, and you could.
I just want to point out one thing. You see, it's interesting. I see so many similarities between Ukraine and Israel. The first one is that the two states are actually artificial construction. In reality, when you look at, Israel, the way it was constructed was imposed upon Palestinian, and also one thing which is really interesting, both sides. In Ukraine, you had Ukrainian speakers, Russians. They would mix together, but actually they would even see the differences. So they were living together for centuries, right? The same as Jews and Arabs. They didn't care actually. And the Zionists, they came mainly from Eastern Europe, but it was imposed upon them. So this is a second thing. But another thing is that how do you create a pawn, a puppet, a country that is going to fight for you? You do indoctrination. How did they do the indoctrination in Ukraine? It was Nazi ideology. Nazi ideology, it's a sense of superiority. Well, how did they do that in Israel? They used the religion. You are the elected people, and actually there was a huge indoctrination with the Holocaust. All this memory, everybody's after us, and so on. I'm not going there, but again, they had to find a way to unite people and to radicalize people. But in reality, when you look at how they were living before you had external elements, and in this case, I'm talking about the British Empire, the US that came in, they were living at peace. They were at peace. They didn't even care. They didn't see the differences. And that's what it's sad. If you talk to people that know about the history of Palestine, but people just didn't care. And in reality, I mentioned this last time. There's a very interesting book from Shlomo San, who's actually a professor in Tel Aviv University, and he talks about the history. And do you know that there are lots of Palestinians that were actually Jews converted to Islam for some reason? It probably was related to tax. If you're Muslims, you wouldn't pay tax, or just a few details. Okay, and then you have many Jews. They were actually converted Jews that are not linked to the original tribes, and they came into Palestine, and they claim to be from the land of Israel. So you see, in reality, you have many Jews that might have been Palestinians, Arabs before, and vice versa. In reality, so this is all a manipulation. But they had to build this whole history. Oh, we are originally from the land of Israel. But you know what? Why do you have so many white Jews? Why? They're not from there. They were converted. This is an inconvenient truth. And people they jump into you. They say, well, you're anti-Semite and so on. It's not. I don't even care. It's a religion, by the way.
Also, the Palestinians are Semites. Arab people are Semites. Exactly. So this is another thing that is completely lost on people that wade into this topic. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to point that out. I also wanted to point out that you were talking about how they indoctrinated Ukrainians, especially in the West, to hate their own culture, language, heritage, religion, anything to do with Russia historically. They did that in Israel big time in the education system, media, politically. They're doing it in Taiwan, in Asia, which has absolutely nothing to do with Israelis, Muslims, Jews, Christians, has nothing to do with any of that, but it is the exact same process, because that is what empire does. This is something people have to understand. They care about the Palestinian issue. Obviously, they see people being treated poorly. They become emotionally invested in it, but they don't zoom out and look at how the U.S. is doing this absolutely everywhere else. And if they understood that, if they could see that, and they could see that they're doing it in the exact same way everywhere else also, there's nothing particularly special about this conflict. It is just one of many. And then to solve this problem, you have to get to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is not actually Israel. The root of the problem is U.S. imperialism. If you get to the root of that problem, you will solve this conflict between Israel and Palestine. You will get to the bottom of the conflict in Ukraine. You will get to the bottom of the tensions building up over the status of China's island province of Taiwan. You will get to the bottom of a lot of these problems we see around the globe popping up in the news.
Yeah, I just had someone mentioning me, oh, you forgot the pain of the Jews, how they were oppressed by Arabs and so on. It's not true, actually. I mean, one of the largest Jewish communities actually in Iran. It's in Iran, and they are big supporters of before Ahmadinejad, and then the problem was Zionists. The Zionists at the apartheid state. Zionism was imposed upon the Jews, and actually, why Arabs should take the pain because of what Europe did and what Hitler did. I mean, there was a
not a good argument. That's not a good argument.
No. Again, I think the main problem is the U.S. interfering and actually creating tensions. Zionism is a problem because it's about colonizing. It's one thing to emigrate, but when you create an apartheid state, you deny the dignity of Arabs. I mean, Gaza is 2 million people. Open prison. You have people have left Gaza for decades just because they can't leave. Yeah. And now Netanyahu, what is he doing? Is declaring, oh, we are going to cut electricity and water to 2 million
gas
people.
Too, I think.
And gas. Again, it's not. It's hard not to side for the plight of Palestinians, really.
So I see another comment, and I will probably get a lot of this. They say, what about Jewish imperialism? There's no Jewish imperialism. If the United States was not and before that the British Empire was not supporting Israel, it probably wouldn't even exist. And here's another thing. I say people need to zoom out and look around at other examples. Angela pointed out Ukraine, the superiority complex that people in Western Ukraine have. They think that they're better than Russians. The Russians are subhuman, even though people in Western Ukraine are Slavs, just like Russians are. What about Taiwan and Hong Kong? And Angelo has been living in Hong Kong. The U.S.-sponsored oppositions there had a superiority complex over the rest of China. They honestly believe somehow they are superior. And,
they did.
And they're literally the exact same people. They're genetically, culturally, linguistically exactly the same. And yet in their brains, they have this superiority complex. Should we call that Taiwanese imperialism? Ukrainian imperialism? It doesn't exist. It is a artificial creation that the U.S. deliberately made and are using. And without the U.S. behind it, these ideas would gain no traction because they're ridiculous.
Yeah, you can antagonize people even across the streets. They are from that area of the city. You know how people they can think very small. It's my area, like gangsters, small gangsters. They say, well, we are better, or we are from that high school. That's very easy to antagonize people, and that's what they did in Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong, you had they put Chinese against Chinese, and they were like, "Oh, we are Hong Konger, we are better. We are we are educated. We were under colonial rules.
We shined the British shoes. We got to actually touch their shoes. That makes us better than you."
But that worked. You see, but that worked with the kids. You see, you had the gap of generation. So in Hong Kong, you had the kids. Actually, they divided the kids and their parents. The parents, they were so much against the kids because they were like, you know what? We lived under colonial rule. And we were third grade citizens. Some areas in Hong Kong, we are not allowed to go to. You know, there was a peak ordinance that, you know, the richest area in Hong Kong, Chinese could not go there. The parents know, the kids don't. The kids, they were educated through Hollywood. And that's the same problem we have in Taiwan. That's the same problem they had in Ukraine. Do you think that the generation gap was not the same? Who bought into this Aryan Nazi ideology in Ukraine? Not the parents, not the 50 years old. Why? Because they used to live with Russian, and actually they spoke Russian. Now the kids, they start those movements with hooligans. The right sector. Why do they call it the right sector? Because it was an area in the stadium called the right sector. You take hooligans with very low IQ, that are looking for meaning in their life, and then you say, oh, you are special. That's how you do. And the same, how did they do with the Jews, with the Zionists? They say, well, we are the elected people, we have a special mission and so on. How did they do with this imperialistic project in the US? Well, the US somehow is not very different, How do they call the exceptionalism, right? That's the same. Once you have this sense of exceptionalism, you want to export that. Oh, we are right. Well, do you see the same from the Russians and the Chinese? No, at least you know what they say? They say live and let live. We're not saying we are the best. What happened in my home, it happens in my home. But don't try to export the things and impose upon me everything, I mean, it was one thing to impose a currency and so on. But now, it comes down to the way I live my life, the way I educate my kids, your ideology. And that's not only China and Russia, that's 75% of the world. We don't want that. And even the collective West, people are victim of their own government that they want actually to deconstruct human being.
Yeah, and I see people talking about APEC. Yes, APEC exists. It's a lobbying group. They attempt to lobby their U.S. sponsors to get more goodies, to get more support, to get political support, material support. But all of these other groups also have their lobbyists in Washington doing the exact same thing. Do people honestly believe somehow APEC controls U.S. foreign policy? And what could possibly make you think that? And people say, well, they were the ones that got the U.S. to go into Iraq and Syria and put sanctions on Iran. Do you honestly think that the U.S. wouldn't be doing that anyway? They were waging war all throughout Central and South America in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They still are meddling there, undermining the sovereignty of nations there. They waged war from Libya to Afghanistan and everywhere in between. They waged an extremely long and destructive war in Vietnam. That had nothing to do with APEC. APEC was not the one asking them to do that. And all of these wars that APEC supposedly convinced the U.S. to go fight made trillions of dollars for the special interests that actually do control U.S. and drive U.S. foreign policy. People say, well, there's a lot of Jews in the U.S. government. There's a lot of people who are not Jews in the U.S. government. And this bothers me and is so ridiculous. I remember all during the War on Terror, people started saying, oh, Muslims are taking over America. Obama is a secret Muslim. And it's the exact same mindset, the exact same type of thinking, because people don't understand how the world really works. Explain to me how Israel, with the tiny population it has, the small economy it has, the small military it has, that can't even reach the Litani River in southern Lebanon. Explain to me how they are twisting the arm of the United States and making them do anything. Explain how that works.
Yeah, Brian, I have an explanation of how they want to do it. This is the whole idea about conspiracy theory. You have real conspiracy that happened. Those are facts. They're there and they conspire. That's how they do. That's how we do war. If you want to go into a war, you need to conspire to go to war. Okay, conspiration happens. But then they throw inside some conspiracy that actually are going to discredit everything. So you have 10 facts, but then you throw in the Jewish question and you say, oh, they're ruling the world. And you lose completely credibility. This is the same as they associate people. You think the earth is flat. And then they associate, and then they discard, well, you know what? It's all conspiracy theory. And that's the problem. I think it's they are within the globalist elites. Of course, some are Jews, but some are Arabs too. Maybe some are even Chinese, actually. You might have actually some powerful Chinese there. Yeah. But, when it gets to that level, there's no nation state, there's no nationality. It's the globalist elites. And they don't make any difference. There's no color, skin, and so on. But they happen to be originally from, the white and Anglo-Saxon, world, the origins, the Rockefeller and so on, and the new, the Bill Gates and so on. But otherwise, it's not. This. It's just It's just absurd. This.
And so people are saying, how come people have to do this for Israel, that for Israel? Because Israel is an extremely important proxy of the United States. One of their oldest projects, one of their most important, most effective, cost-effective projects that they have created and are maintaining. And just imagine if somehow they could do the exact same thing with Ukraine 20, 30, 40 years from now. You're not allowed to, even right now, you're not allowed to say anything about. Remember when the special military operation began, you'd get deleted off of YouTube for saying anything truthful about Ukraine. So they do the exact same thing. And mark my words, if there is any sort of conflict between the U.S. and China, they'll do the exact same thing for anyone talking about, talking about the truth regarding Taiwan. You will be gone. So again, these are people who are hyper-focused, obsessed with Jews and Israel, and they have this tunnel vision that prevents them from seeing that the U.S. is doing this with every other group, every other proxy all around the globe and all throughout the history of empire has been doing this. This is nothing new. It's nothing special. And it's just, again, it's exactly like people who bought into the war on terror and they thought Muslims were secretly taking over the U.S. It's the exact same thing. I heard the Saudi prince bought a port there's always some port that the Saudis, the Jews, the Chinese are always buying some port somewhere, and this is like the start of their invasion and takeover of America. There's a lot of news articles out there like that.
Brian, where do you see this going? So now we are talking about possibly a second front. You have this advance from Gaza to the West Bank. So they might reach the West Bank. I still don't understand how they can do that. I mean, with such a powerful army, that's a big question mark. And I think we'll have more clarification in the coming weeks. And then you have from the north, you have the Hezbollah. And the Hezbollah, I think it's a much stronger army, much more organized.
Yes.
And then the question is what will happen with Iran? I mean, what's the goal? I mean, is it like maybe, okay, well, trying to speculate here, but Netanyahu has a problem internally. Okay, maybe he wants to go to all-out war. That's a pretext so he can finish this whole Palestinian question, and then he left the okay to carpet bomb many places around Palestine, or just going to. I had people just saying in my tweets, answers that it's about going after Iran and before Iran gets the nuclear bomb. I don't know what's.
Although I would say Iran's conventional warfare capabilities are at a point right now where I don't really think it matters. I think they would benefit from having a nuclear weapon, and they've never said that they're going to use it. I go to the think tanks, go to the U.S. Government and corporate funded think tanks and read what they themselves say about Iran. They say even if Iran developed a nuclear weapon, there's no way they would let it fall into the hands of some other group, some extremist group to then go and use. They have extremely capable security forces that would handle this, and they're the ones that already handle all of Iran's other extremely powerful conventional warfare capabilities. I think they even said something like they have biological or chemical weapon stockpiles that these same security forces maintain, and they've never let any of that fall into anyone else's hands. So why would they do that with nuclear weapons? But your question is, where is this going to go? It's hard to say. I find it hard to believe that Israel will not eventually get their forces organized, figure out what's going on, and then begin reacting to it. They have a larger military, a better equipped military, better weapons, better everything. Logistically, they do depend on the U.S. for a lot. They have their own arms industry. I haven't seen any of their arms industry targeted by these attacks yet. So they, I think they can sustain a credible defense against this and get the upper hand almost inevitably. Hezbollah, we've seen some sort of exchange between Hezbollah, but are they joining this? Are they siding with Hamas? I don't know. And did Israel do something to Hezbollah to get them to react at the same time all of this is going on? We don't know. We don't know what is exactly behind all of this. So we have to kind of wait and see. And then Iran, of course, where do they fit into all of this? And is this some situation that Israel invited? Maybe they didn't organize it, but they knew about it. They invited it upon themselves because they want to perhaps do something before the window of opportunity closes. Angelo, you and I, we've talked a lot about how the window of opportunity is closing for the United States and its proxies all around the world, whether it's Ukraine, Syria, Taiwan. The window is closing, and they know that if they don't do something now, they may never get an opportunity to do it again once multipolarism irreversibly emerges. So maybe that's it. I mean, it's just so hard to tell. What I will point out, though, is the fighting that we've been seeing so far, and based on the videos and the reports coming out, a lot of these capabilities that Israel has that were supposed to give them a huge margin of superiority militarily over Palestinian militant groups, that really doesn't exist. Their only advantage that they have now is that they have a larger military that's better supplied for the time being. This is not sustainable into the future. I've said this many times. Even all the way back in 2006, this was becoming evident. Israel's not going to be able to excuse itself from having a rational and humane foreign policy because it has military superiority over all of its neighbors. It doesn't exist anymore. And every year that goes by, its superiority, its edge that it has or had militarily, that wanes. So they're coming to a juncture here where they're going to have to decide, just like Saudi Arabia had to decide, are we going to continue being this proxy, the junkyard dog for the Middle East, for the United States? Are we going to continue doing that until there's nothing left? Or are we going to develop a rational foreign policy? It will not be easy because there's so many people in Israel so deeply invested in this, emotionally, in terms of money and power, militarily. It will be very hard for this transition to happen. But again, look at Saudi Arabia and Iran. That's something I thought would never happen, or at least not anytime soon, and it has happened. And I think the facts on the ground will compel Israel. Maybe not this time. There was Angelo, do you remember we were doing live streams about the last armed violence between Israel and Palestine? We did something. It was when Israel was bombing Palestine, bombing these high-rise buildings and everything. And we said the same thing. It's not going to happen this time. It might not happen next time. But this is a process that is taking place that, for all intents and purposes, is irreversible. It eventually will happen. And Israel's going to have to make this choice. And they're not going to be able to continue getting away with what they're doing now. It's unsustainable being a U.S. proxy is unsustainable.
Yeah, but Israel in itself is unsustainable. Just the fact that within Israelis you have, I think it's 20% of Arabs. Demography in the demography in Arabs is
Yes.
higher. So how sustainable is that? It's just they need to find a solution. So is it like you integrate Arabs within one state, or you do the two-state solution? But it is not sustainable. And then again, I mean, that's still an apartheid state. You have people with different.
One other thing. Yeah, one other thing just to keep in mind, just as we see for Ukraine, they're letting time go by. They get opportunities to resolve the conflict in a way that would suit their interests as well. They let the time go by, and then they don't get that good deal anymore. The deal gets worse and worse and worse the longer they drag it out. And I think the same goes for Israel. They're in a position of power right now. They could make a very good deal for themselves, and then they could go on into the future in a sustainable and constructive way, integrated into the rest of the region. The longer they let this go, the harder it's going to be for them to make that transition, and the less leverage they're going to have to do it with.
Brian, just to resume a little bit this issue, so you would agree that we are skeptical that somehow we have the impression that Israel, or not Israel, but the leaders of Israel let this thing happen? Would you agree on that? Or I mean,
there's a lot of evidence that suggests that for these militant groups to have assembled all of these fighters, arms, everything that they have been building up, and then it's around the time of a holiday, which everywhere else in the world, when a big holiday comes up and you're in some sort of serious armed conflict, there's always this extra caution that they exercise when it comes up. And it seems like Israel just threw all of that into the wind, and they were just almost deliberately negligent to invite it in. And that's why we have to pay close attention. We cannot jump to conclusions, and that includes regarding the role of Hamas. Now, I would say Hezbollah is a much different organization. It has different motivations. It operates in a completely different way. So what they do in regards to all of this might help us see this picture a little clearer. And then the same goes for Iran's support, whatever support that might be in all of this. But look at what happened. Look how humiliating this has been for the Israeli Defense Force. Look how humiliating this is going to be for both the political and military leadership in Israel right now. Benjamin Netanyahu, who's going to look at him and say, this guy shouldn't have to step down. This is okay. Hey, we got him in the end. He should still stay on. They had those protests. Somebody was trying to undermine or remove him from office. So we have to answer these questions. Who is that and why? And did they help precipitate this? It doesn't mean everything is all engineered down to the last detail, but there could have been certain elements at work here that encouraged this or was negligent in detecting and stopping it. That's something we have to keep in mind. I wouldn't say for sure yet, but I would just say keep it in mind.
Absolutely. We are close to we are at 53 minutes. Do you want to take a few questions? Maybe we have another 10 minutes. Brian,
we can take some questions or talk a little bit longer about this. I'm looking through.
Well, the risk, I would say, I wanted to just to point out, I mean, the risk, if there was an all-out war, I mean, right now, let's say if there was an extension with Hezbollah, Lebanon, and then Iran, I think economically it would be a disaster. I mean, we could have, keep in mind that the Strait of Hormuz, that's where, I don't know, probably 40% of the oil export, the source of oil, it goes through the Strait of Hormuz. If they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, just think about what it would do to global economy. I mean, if oil at $200 a barrel, that would be just massive. So I don't know.
It's a good distraction. It's a good distraction away from Project Ukraine, as
Yes.
Alex Christoforou calls it.
Yeah.
Project Ukraine is doing very poorly right now. They have no way out. So, hey, let's just start a fire somewhere else and say, hey, look at that. And then just let this go away. Let this fade out of view. Nobody cares. I already saw European countries projecting not the Ukrainian flag anymore. Now it's the Israeli flag is being projected on all the landmarks and buildings and monuments. So it seems like almost too good to be true, this distraction so perfectly timed, right as things almost seems like they couldn't get worse in Ukraine. Now you have this distraction. And the US is saying, well, we're talking about providing military aid. You're talking about the economic ramifications, which I agree it will be catastrophic. But beyond that, how could Israel sustain a large-scale conflict with either Lebanon and Hezbollah again, like they had done in 2006? They ran out of bombs. The U.S. was sending bombs through the UK to Israel because they were out of bombs. They needed more bombs delivered from the U.S. So that they have a powerful military, but their weakness seems to be, and I don't know if they've rectified this. I don't think that they would have rectified this. Seems to be the same with the rest of the West. They do not have the military industrial capacity to fight a large scale, intense conflict, both in the air and on the ground. So if they had that problem just getting into southern Lebanon in 2006, they haven't really tried anything like that since then. What are they going to be doing in regards to Iran? Iran has sophisticated air defense systems. It is a much, much bigger country, many more people. They've been waiting for this. They're waiting for the U.S. and its proxies to attack them. They've been preparing for it for decades. It just doesn't seem like it'll go very well. But again, as that person in the comment section said, Israel's a disposable proxy. So, hey, things are changing. Israel inevitably is going to pivot away from the U.S. and pursue a more sane, humane foreign policy. Before that happens, let's just trash it. Just like they talk about doing with Taiwan. Yeah. Inevitably, it's going to fully reunite with the rest of China. Let's trash it. Let's scour the surface of the island of all industry, infrastructure, and human life, and make China pay the highest price possible for essentially winning, outweighing the U.S. and its imperialism.
Actually, it's interesting. You see, they were talking about Russia going to a war economy, and Russia will probably never need to do that unless it goes into war against NATO. But on the contrary, when it comes to Israel declared war. Actually, we are talking about I don't know how many reservists, but probably 100,000 reservists. But people from the reserves going to the army right now, just to, even calling for Israelis to come back to to serve the army. The Israelis that are living abroad. And that would be, when you look at the proportion of the population in Israel could very soon be into a war economy, and Israel cannot afford that. Economically, it's not a powerhouse, Israel.
Which is why I just wonder why people think somehow Israel is running the whole.
No,
world.
It's been receiving money from the U.S. Actually, it's not that it's a parasite state, but it has been financed for many years. I don't know. We talk about billions of dollars. Actually, the country in the world that before Ukraine, of course, but before Ukraine, Israel for many years, for decades, was the most recipient of U.S. aid, and the second one was actually I think it's Egypt. But I think recently they are talking about just stopping sending money to Egypt. So that's
yeah. Well, I see a question here. It says, and I agree with you, but if you look into the numbers, Israel's own arms industry, they sell arms all around the globe. And they actually make They make enough money where they don't actually need that money. So what is the U.S. sending money to Israel for? Is it the same as Ukraine? They're using it as a washing machine. They're sending
Yeah.
the money in, and they're sending the money in to keep a specific political party and order in place. That is what the money is for, because they really don't need it. It's not as if they don't have any economy at all. It's not a powerhouse that is capable of, leveraging its money and influence to bend the West to its will, but it is able to do a lot of things on its own.
Do you want to explain it, Brian, for our viewers, how this money laundering scheme works? It works actually the same for Ukraine, right? It's do you want to explain it?
Well, maybe you can explain it. I think you could probably do a better job on this.
But basically, you have those interest groups. Let's say from Ukraine, they are paying politicians in the U.S. And in exchange, those politicians actually fund Ukraine, and that money actually part of it stays in the pocket of those oligarchs or in the economy of Ukraine, but it's actually funds those special groups that will be able to keep on funding those politicians. So you see, that's money laundering. So that's the same with Israel. So Israel pays the politicians in the US, and in exchange, the politicians in the US send back much more money to Israel, and that's how and somehow they maintain this influence too.
Yeah, and also they send billions to Israel, and then Israel's buying weapons from Raytheon and Lockheed and Boeing and all of them. So it's a giant scam, and that's what imperialism is. It's everything at everyone else's cost except for the people running it and benefiting from it. So here's some questions. One says, "Hey Brian, why don't you talk about slaughtering young children and elderly people and what cowardice that is?" We already did. We already said both sides do it. It's wrong. It's indefensible. There's no way to justify it. The groups and people and governments that allow that to happen are at fault. There's no excuse. And there, not every militant group in the region does stuff like that. Hezbollah does not kill civilians deliberately. I've never seen, even the Western media that wants to smear them has a very hard time making that case. So yeah, we have talked about that. Both sides are doing it. Hamas is taking civilians hostage right now. How do you justify that? And Israel, and here's the thing about this aspect of it. Israel does the most despicable things. It's so despicable that it almost seems as if they're doing it on purpose. And why are they doing it on purpose? To provoke extremism on the other side, to keep the strategy of tension going. That's the whole part. That's what empires done throughout time. They divide and conquer. That is what they're doing in the Middle East. It's elementary. There's another question. It says,
I want to, Brian.
Yeah,
I just want to. This is a continuation of what the person was just saying before. Okay, the slaughtering of human being and so on. This is the human cost of the Israeli conflict. And let me check just for which period. This is a period of 2008 to 2020. So you see how many in red here you have injured, and in black people killed. I mean, it's disproportionate. It's disproportionate what the death. Okay, you have total death 2008 to 2020, 5,590 Palestinian death against 251. I mean, this is just factual. Again, what we saw these days, we have crimes, it's atrocious, and we condemn whatever, especially civil life. But again, this is proportional use of force. And again, who's the occupier? Who's again, who's living in an open air prison is the Palestinians. We shouldn't reverse the roles here. But again, what we saw these days, we saw many civilians being killed. And
some of them are being deliberately killed, and that is never excusable.
Yeah.
And I understand that Israel humiliates these people daily. They humiliate them, they bully them, they hurt them, they kill them deliberately. They do it deliberately. It's not okay for you to then do it deliberately back. I mean, why are you fighting if you're going to become what you're fighting? Why are you even fighting in the first place? Because you just want your team to win, even though your team is doing things just as bad. They are allowed to resist. They're allowed to take up arms and fight back and defend themselves. Absolutely. I agree with that. You're not allowed to, you shouldn't kill women and children. People who aren't part of the conflict. It's common sense. It's basic. It's just basic humanity. I mean, what are we talking about here?
And I think for us, it's very hard to understand what Palestinians go through. I mean, we are talking about daily humiliation from being a kid, the checkpoints. I think only Palestinians know what they have to go through. And if they are willing to die for that it's not religion. This is because they get to a point where they've lost completely all that dignity and humanity. And on the other side, they want them to become animals. You do become animals. You lose completely dignity. What do you do when you have lost everything? When they've killed your kid, let's say they kill your kid. What do you do? Yeah.
There's another super chat there.
Let me check. If Hamas
I agree with this. Yeah.
It means the Brotherhood is involved, absolutely, which means Israel. Absolutely, that's what we are saying. But again, this might not be. A lot of people are going to go against us on this, But I want to point out one thing: we are not here to please people. We're trying to report, to have an objective view. And this might not please pro-Palestinians. Actually, it will not please both sides. Actually. But it's important to keep an objective mind that Hamas is not the solution. Hamas, those are extremists. And actually, there's a tweet by Thomas Fazi. He actually says that this general that is exposing the fact that Israel was funding the Muslim Brotherhood, who were funding the Hamas. He was saying, well, we actually created a monster, and then we have to deal with this monster. That reminds us something. You know who it reminds me? It reminds me Al Qaeda. It reminds me ISIS, and it reminds me something more recent. The Nazi up there, those Nazis, the Azov battalion, and so on. This new ideology. This is a monster we'll have to deal one day or another. Well, now Israel is facing Hamas, and that somehow they contributed to the creation of Hamas. They did. There are actually 3 articles. I will put actually those 3 articles, New York Times and other articles, related to the fact that actually Israel was behind the creation of Hamas. Inconvenient truth, like it or not.
And that's why there's multiple organizations, because Hamas is problematic, and so there is a necessity for other organizations. The Muslim Brotherhood is highly problematic. If not just again, they created Israel, they created the Muslim Brotherhood. They use both of them as tools to rearrange the region in a way they see fit and benefit from. There was another question that was asking about how is Russia stepping in to protect the Donbas the same as Palestine? It is the right to self-determination under international law, and I say yes. The people in Palestine have a right to defend themselves against Israeli expansion into their territory, physical abuse, being killed by war weapons. They have a right to do that, and Palestine should have a state. There should be a state where Palestine exists and is allowed to live in peace and prosperity. That I agree with that. We're not arguing against that. We're talking about the means through which you achieve this.
Can I add one more thing? I think you might agree. Just confirm if you are on the same line with me. But most of our work is about non-interference. So that single fact, if there was no interference on the first place between Arabs and Jews back in 1948 or long time ago, we wouldn't be here. And I think somehow if that's the interference that actually makes this problem not go away. So that's ultimately, we who are we to judge, how they're dealing with each other. The problem is always that interference. You take away in the equation the interference where you have big brother who's backing one of the two and antagonize them, divide and control, then everything changes. The whole dynamic, the whole world changed, because you can apply this everywhere. Every single conflict, you go inside and you realize very often it's neocolonialism. You have one side being backed. Very often is the weaker side actually being backed, and they bully the other side because Big Brother is there. Once you take away this, everything will solve. And it's going to be locally. I believe that conflict should be dealt locally. You always find, why would you have, for example, the US going all the way to China and dealing with the territorial issues between Japan, China, Malaysia, Philippines? It's absurd.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the comments people are, that say, I hate Hamas, but why are you? We're not saying that people in Palestine don't have a right to take up arms and fight. We're not saying that at all. We're saying Hamas is problematic. When Hamas gets involved, it's not as straightforward as Palestine just defending themselves. Oftentimes, in Hamas's case, they make things much worse. And has Hamas solved anything at all ever? And the answer is no, they haven't. As a matter of fact, they perpetuate this problem.
Keep in mind, people should never forget who was at the beginning of the creation of Hamas. And the question is Hamas a convenient enemy? ISIS in Syria is a convenient enemy. All those jihad in Africa are very often a Western construction. Very often the French actually support them. They pretend they are the enemies, and those jihad are the reasons that the French come in and say, we are there to fight the jihad. But you know what? You never had direct confrontation between the jihadists and the French. Same as in Syria. How many times you see ISIS fighting the US? Never. The US is there because they want to pump the oil, right?
Yeah. I also want to point out, expand on what you just said, Angelo. These extremists in especially North Africa, their arms came to them through Libya when the US and the rest of Europe were arming and backing Al-Qaeda. It was the Libyan Al-Qaeda branch that they were arming, funding, and flying air sorties in support of. And all of those weapons, and people at the time who understood what was going on, and I used to write articles about this in 2011, all of those weapons are going to go everywhere else in the region, and they will pump up all of these extremists, just as you say, Angela. They pretend are the enemy, but they just use as a pretext for their perpetual military presence in the region, and as their way of sinking their hooks in and meddling in each and every one of these countries. And that's why we see a lot of these coups, not all of these coups, a lot of these coups are popping up and challenging French, first and foremost, because of the history and the prominent role France plays, but also AFRICOM, US AFRICOM. So we have to keep that in mind. Someone asked about no, go ahead, Angela.
Oh, you mentioned the weapons. Actually, we found out that there are weapons coming from in the hands of Hamas. They are coming from Ukraine. Those are the news we get.
But I'm waiting to confirm that.
We wait to confirm that, but quite a few are actually saying that. We're waiting for confirmation, but that would be just something that we've been saying before. Not only that the weapons would turn into African countries or other conflicts, but also maybe also maybe one day Azov will turn against us, the same as ISIS did turn against us.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are defending Hamas, I heard these same arguments by people defending Al-Qaeda. They say, well, the US is super evil, and they go around the world, which is true, and they bully these countries, they kill people in these countries, which is true, and people get angry and they want to rise up, which is also true. But that's not what Al-Qaeda was. They created Al-Qaeda to displace genuine resistance. And they actually use Al-Qaeda and ISIS to fight against genuine resistance in Iraq, You had Sunni and Shia Muslims working together in the beginning. So they just spun up Al Qaeda and set them loose, and they were chopping the heads off of Shia Muslims, and it kicked off a civil war. And guess what? Took the heat off the United States. Again, elementary divide and conquer. People have to be smarter. They have to.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like in the comments, people, they really want us to take side. Of course, we have, somehow, we lean on pro-Palestinian. We lean on that. But it's important. What we are trying to do is an exercise to have a more pragmatic approach and take a step back. Because if you're only taking the conflict itself, Palestine and Israel, then you are stuck. You need to have a much higher view, and put that into historical perspective. Otherwise, we're not objective. It's easy to say, well, just simplistic, good, bad, but it's not like this. We need to have nuances, and things change. Hopefully, I mean, Israelis are there. If you are pro-Palestinian, Israelis are there. What are you going to do with them? Well, somehow you need to find a solution. Same as Kosovo and other places. Because of history, there was displacement of people and so on. But at some point, you know what? You need to sit down and say, well, you cannot change. This has become a reality, Israel. Well, how you can work with that? But you cannot say, well, you know what, let's erase Israel. No, but it's just and nobody in their right mind would agree with that. And you see, who are the others?
Russia and China.
Exactly. Follow what China and Russia, what are they doing? What is their approach? You know what? It's a fact. Israel exists, but then we need to find a solution with the Palestinians and how they can live at peace. And somehow, you know what? Once the US won't be in the equation, I'm sure that you have Israelis that will be willing to extend a hand. If they don't have any choice, the day that they won't have any choice, then it's going to be a fait accompli. You got to sit down and behave like an adult and start to respect Palestinians as human beings.
Yeah, and I mean, I am sympathetic toward Palestine. I want to see Palestinian people have their own state and live in peace and prosperity. I want the current regime in Israel, not the current administration, just the whole political system that makes this possible to torment Palestine, and also to torment, launch missiles, drop bombs on their neighbors. That needs to stop. That needs to go away. That is indefensible. It is intolerable, but it's also unsustainable. And everyone knows that it's unsustainable. At the same time, some of the most vocal opponents of what Israel does today live in Israel are Israelis. That's something else to keep in mind. A lot of the people in Israel, either they don't care, a lot of them are opposed to it. Yes, and you do have people who are all for it. They completely support the current regime. But why? Why is that? Did they wake up and make a conscious decision, or were they brainwashed from cradle to grave? And that's what Russia and China see. They see a country with people that goes beyond just the current administration and the current circle of interests that are running things. They see that, they understand that these are people just like everywhere else, and there is some point in the future where we might be able to work with them, and we might be able to create conditions between them and their neighbors that they're fighting against right now, where they're not fighting each other, which is better for us, because the more stable the planet is, the better it is for Russia and especially China. That's what China wants. That's why they're building peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They want to do business in the region, and war is bad for business. Their type of business, building things, the U.S. type of business, it's great for their type of business. So people have to keep that in mind. They have to keep that in mind. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to add one thing, which is really important. The problem is radical minorities. You see, you don't need millions of people, radicals. Of course, you have many in Israel. That's true. You have indoctrination very early, and they are taught to hate Arabs, and that's wrong. But what I'm saying is that whenever you go to any countries, you realize that it's a very tiny minority that sometimes can be aggressive, but average people are not politicized. I was recently in the Philippines, and I would talk to 100 of people, maybe out of 100, maybe there might be one which is radical, who's going to be, China bad, or I don't know, just. But most of the people, they're not. And when you look at how Maidan in 2014 happened, how many were there? It's 1,000 people, extremely radical, people that were willing to die and kill, that took over. Those are the danger. But average people are victims. And you know what? I know will not please some people, but many on both sides, in Israel, in Palestine, many people are victims of that because they are hijacked by minorities, and you have also imperial powers that are in between, that are actually dividing both sides. But ultimately, why did Jews and Arabs live side by side for thousands of years? Because they were exactly the same. What we want to point out is that ultimately we are all the same. We are all the same. The problem is that divided and control system is about destroying everything, and this is why Chinese, I've said it quite a few times, but they like to say, look for what unites us and set aside the differences. We'll always have differences, but if you focus only on the differences, then it's the same as a couple. Imagine you meet someone and the only thing is you focus is the differences, but you know what, you never get married. If you focus all the time about what unites us, that's irrational. In a couple, in a relationship, and between people, and ultimately it's a much more adult. In terms of philosophy, it's much. If you're aiming for peace, that's what the direction you should be going to.
Yeah, I want to say one other thing too. I see everyone's like, we have to destroy Israel. The Jews run the world. And then a lot of these are the same people who are saying, I support Russia and China. I'm glad Russia initiated the special military operation. The Nazis in Ukraine have to go. But I mean, do you hear yourself? I mean, who do you think you have more in common with? Do you think you have more in common with the Russians who initiated the special military operation, or the people in Western Ukraine that the operation is aimed at? Because in Moscow, they're not saying we need to eliminate Israel. You will never hear them say that. They have a close relationship with Israel. They have a close relationship with Palestine. And you will hear different people in different corners of the political spectrum accusing Russia of being pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. They're being accused of both because they care about and want to help both. And the same goes for China. And the same should go for anyone who understands that we're all human beings. This is as Angelo's laying out, this is artificial. This is an artificially created conflict. Any problem, you cannot solve it by treating the symptoms. The symptoms are the violence we see between Israel and Palestine, the inhumanity that the Israeli government, as a matter of policy, imposes on the Palestinian people. These are all symptoms. What is the actual source of this problem? It is U.S. imperialism. And before that, it was British imperialism. Same is going on in Myanmar, right next door to Thailand. You have all these groups brutally murdering each other because of all these religious and ethnic divides that the British created and perpetuate even to this day. The U.S. took the lead, but the British are still involved. They're doing that still to this very day in Myanmar. It has nothing to do with Jews and Muslims. I guarantee you that.
Yeah, ultimately, what we are trying to do is to bring some clarification. I mean, with humble capacity, bring some clarification on the political landscape. But it's all. Ultimately, what we want is that people, they have facts in their hands. I mean, then at the end of the day, it's opinions. But if people don't have at least the foundation, then opinions are worth nothing if you don't have the foundation. So we're trying to clarify, put into the context, and political landscape. It's about who are the actors, what is the objective, and put that into the perspective of history. You don't learn about history. You cannot do a snapshot and have a judgment about a country or even a person. You need to go back and who are the actors, and then you need to you need to look closely and then take a higher approach, and you need to go back and forth. If you don't do that, it's worth nothing. It's good, bad, you simplify, oh, it's black or white. No, it's not like this. It's not like this. You need to, you need to do homework. And again, this is in humble capacity, meaning that we don't have all the answers. But ultimately, I think the goal, it's not so much about taking side. It's the question, or actions, what we are doing, is it promoting peace or not? And I think this is the way I see it. You understand, Brian, where I want to go to is that ultimately, if what we are saying is going to promote peace, then we have a contribution. But if now we are going to say, well, you know what? Let's, those Jews, those Zionists, they're bad, they're evil and so on. How much are we going to contribute? We are trying to give the information, the facts, and how the world could be better. And we actually realize that the multipolar world is going to bring in solutions that are going to end this divide and control thing. And once you start promoting trade, mutual development, you are going to have a new paradigm. Everything will change.
And I see comments like this all the time, and I've seen this for over 10 years now. Russia has no courage. They're cowards. They're traitors. They betray Syria because when Turkey does something, they don't, drop a nuclear bomb in the middle of Ankara. They're cowards. They won't, arm Hamas or something like that. And the reality is, it has nothing to do with courage. They're being smart. They're thinking many, many more steps ahead than people who are driven by emotion. They were thinking throughout the entirety of their intervention in Syria. They were thinking of the long game. They were thinking of ultimately at the very end, victory. How do we achieve victory? We do not achieve it by caving into our emotions, allowing ourselves to be provoked by the US, whether it's through Turkey or Saudi Arabia. We're going to continue building our relationship with Turkey, even as they're shooting our planes down, because we understand what the actual source of the problem is. And we understand that this is a symptom of that source. And we are going to think about this, and we are going to win in the long term because we understand the problem and we have a solution for it. They're doing the exact same thing in regards to Israel and Palestine. It has nothing to do with courage or a lack of courage. They fully understand what's going on. They understand that there is a path forward. They understand what needs to be done. It's not something that could be done overnight. Almost nothing in geopolitics can be.
I want to add one thing is your enemy of today is your friends of tomorrow. We've seen it over and over in time. This is why Putin is actually not going all the way. He knows that at some point it's, we live in the same landmass with Europe. Russian, same landmass is Eurasia. And we've seen throughout history, at some point, Germans and Americans were enemies, then they became friends. And this is like in a time, imagine how long, between 45 to 47, going from enemies to friends. I mean, even though Germany was kind of hijacked. What I'm saying is that things change. And at some point, you don't want to burn bridges. And war, are intermediate, very, very often in history, there were intermediate steps to negotiate a better peace. I mean, sadly, it's a intermediate. So you don't want to go all the way and do crazy stuff like the Germans did in World War II. I mean, this is societal. You end up completely destroyed. The plan for Germany was Morgarten plan was to desindustrialize Germany, to partition Germany. You need to think more rationally, and this is what Putin is doing. He's not going crazy. Or at least we have a rational person there. What worries me is the collective West is going nuts and is becoming completely irrational. It is like, it's this mentality of winner take all. This, when it's winner take all, you double down, double up, double up. You go to the casino and you say, oh, I lost this time, let's put more. I double up, and somehow, well, you know what, you do it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. How many times you need to do it just to learn? It's this idea of sunk cost. This sunk cost theory. It's like we have it in business. Let's say you invest $100 in business, and at some point you're losing money, and you're like, well, because I invested $100, it's okay to put $10 more. And then you keep on losing money, but then you're like, oh, I spend $110. If I add $10, relatively, it's not so much compared to what I already invested. At the end of the day, you need to cut the losses. And that's what the collective West needs to do. They need to, sit down and say, well, let's cut the losses.
Yeah. Someone keeps asking about the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is an air defense system. It's to intercept rockets, essentially. The problem with this is if you don't have a large enough military-industrial base to produce enough interceptors, and your adversary can produce more rockets that you need to intercept, you will saturate their air defense system. There's 2 ways you could do it. You could just overload the system over a period of time where you have more rockets than they have interceptors, or you launch enough rockets at one time where it could only intercept a certain number of them, allowing others to come through. So that is a flaw that all air defense systems have. It's a weakness that can be exploited even with the best air defense systems in the world, and that seems to be the problem the Iron Dome has. I mean, I think we've seen it actually intercept targets before, but it has limits. And
the cost too. I want to add one more thing. The cost too. Interceptors of the Iron Dome is minimum $50,000. Okay, you had 5,000. The estimate of 5,000 rockets being launched. Rockets from Palestinian side, low cost rockets. Well, ultimately it's we said it's industrial complex. The capabilities to produce, but also cost. And this is what we saw in Ukraine. What happened in Ukraine is that you have drones that cost $1,000 destroying a tank that cost millions of dollars, and ultimately it's economics. So in reality, the dome, well, if you at some point it's not, it's finite. You cannot. It's not. You don't have limitless, stock of ammunition for your Iron Dome. And we saw, a saturation. That's the key question. And I think we learned a lot through what happened in Ukraine. It was interesting. Did you see? Hamas was actually using those drones, throwing using the same techniques as Ukrainians and Russians are doing. So you see the whole dynamics is changing. Including air defense. They had never actually applied those techniques on how to destroy air defense. Remember, maybe you can explain, but somehow you need to know where the air defense is. So you need to throw a rocket or missile, then you find out where is the air defense, and you drop a drone, or what's the process? How did they do it? But somehow that's how the Russia managed to destroy most of Ukraine's air defense, right?
Yeah, it's actually very complicated. And then if you're doing air defense properly, you constantly move your systems around. You don't want them. Once you flip on the radar, you're telling the enemy all kinds of information about your capabilities and what systems you have in what area. So it's very complicated. It is much like a chess game. But ultimately, at the end of the day, especially if you have near peer adversaries, whoever has the biggest military industrial base, they are the ones that are going to have the advantage because they can make more air defense systems, more interceptors, and then more of their own systems to overload your air defense systems. This is something we've been talking about for months and months. I just want to point out these people who are saying we've got it all wrong because we don't believe that Jews run the whole world, and that's China and Russia and the US, they all just bow down to the Jews for some reason. And then the person agreeing with them says, yes, 100% is a guy named Mac14SS88, obviously a Nazi or someone pretending to be a Nazi. So just, think about that. Think about that for a while. Look at Russia and China. Look at their foreign policy. It's not because they have nuclear weapons. They have more nuclear weapons than the West does. It's not about a lack of courage. It's about intelligence. It's about thinking ahead. It's about thinking what's best for you, which means thinking about what's best for other people and separating emotion out of it, because that's always going to undo you. One last thing I just want to talk about is the U.S. talking about trying to put together some sort of package to assist Israel. And I'm just wondering if Israel's going to ask for their 155 millimeter artillery rounds back or what, because this is actually a very serious problem for the United States and their proxies. And I remember the Western media writing all these articles about how Russia, in the middle of its special military operation, isn't going to be able to fulfill contracts for all of its allies. India especially, they're saying India is not going to be able to get weapons from Russia anymore because they need all the weapons for their special military operation. Yet Russia was still fulfilling their contracts. And they said the U.S. can fill that void and supply weapons to India, but they can't even supply their own proxy war. So I think they've painted themselves into a real serious corner. And as you say, Angelo, they're out of their minds. They're not rational actors, which is why Russia and China are being patient, and they're thinking ahead, and they're being very careful about what they do, which is the smart thing to do, I would say. We are only supposed to do an hour. We're going.
Yeah, but no, it's an interesting. Absolutely. I mean, and this topic is big. I mean, this could change. This could be big. We don't know where it's going. But I have the impression that this is a diversion. It's a diversion from what is happening in Ukraine. And somehow we see all the news shifting, and maybe it's a way out for the collective West. And this is not the first time that they will use a puppet and discard. I mean, we have many examples. Bin Laden was a U.S. asset, or Juan Guaido. Where is Juan Guaido? He's gone. I mean, so many. Saddam Hussein was he was a U.S. asset. So they played him. Not the first time.
Zelensky's looking over his shoulder, and it's not because he's worried about Russia. He's worried about his Western sponsors getting rid of him, replacing him, or some sort of accident or something happening. I mean, I think a lot of people are starting to notice how uncomfortable Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky looks these days. He looks really at unease, and it's because of the problem with finance, arms, and the whole political instability that he finds himself at the center of. I don't know, Angela, maybe you could answer this. If you have an answer, that would be really great. How come every single one of these proxies always thinks that they're going to be the special one that doesn't get buried alive by the US? And the Armenian leader who just completely delivered, wrapped and tied a ribbon around and handed his own country total defeat, completely painted them into a corner they have no way of getting out. What makes him think that somehow there's a way out for him? There isn't. Why do they keep doing it?
Especially when you look at the location of Armenia, who are, it's far from the EU. It's completely sellout. But again, I think it's about hijacking leaders. They have something on him. Maybe he gets some benefits out of this, but it's pure treason. It's pure treason. I don't know.
Why does Zelensky or any of these U.S. proxies? Why do they think I'm going to be the proxy that everything goes well for, and we're going to have we'll have flying cars and a glistening city, and we'll be at the center of whatever region we're in? Because every single U.S. proxy gets wrecked almost to the last brick, and then the U.S. moves on to the next proxy. And you see a line of people lining up in each country that want to be the next proxy. It's unbelievable.
Okay, but be it this is a bit speculation, my personal opinion. It's not, you see, they have also either you buy them. It's that is one way. Other ways is that you have something on them. So I'll give you an example. Zelensky, they have, a few years ago, they exposed him under the Pandora paper. So OCCRP, and basically they have something on him, corruption, and somehow, they could get him. So they have, the what we call the Damocles spade. It's like you have something on him. So that corruption is one way. So that's how you hijack someone. They can threaten one person, and actually they can use sex. Sex is Epstein Island. You had leaders like Ehud Barak. Those are, they have something on them. So it's not the first time. The FBI, Hoover was actually manipulating many politicians because they had things on them. So that's how they hijack them. Sometimes it's out of ideology. It can happen. But it's just madness. I mean, you have people actually destroying their own country. I mean, Zelensky. I mean, how is he going to live? But look at just physically how Zelensky was 2 years ago and how he's now. I think he's not. He can be a good actor. I won't question that, but you can see physically, this is not a man that is going to live to his 50 or 60s. No, he's going to die early. Maybe it's related to special substances that he might take, but I think the stress is going through. That's I think he probably has problems looking at himself in the mirror. Same as Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido is over. He's gonna live in Miami, but can he live with that? I mean, we are all different. Maybe some people money is enough, but it's living a life of shame. I don't know.
Yeah, and someone asks, maybe if this conflict is going to continue and things escalate, we'll probably do a live stream on my channel, maybe on Wednesday. Angela, how does that sound? Someone was asking about the situation in Thailand. There's a compromised government. There is a U.S. proxy party in power, but it's counterweighted by more establishment presence in the coalition government. So things are not better, but they're not as bad as they could have been. And regarding that mall shooting with this kid, he's a 14-year-old boy with an American hat on his American flag on his hat when he was arrested. This is just the toxic influence of the U.S. Westernism seeping into certain sections of Thai society. People don't know this, but Thailand has the largest private gun ownership in the region, but they're like third in terms of gun violence. And what this is, it's not a matter of access to firearms. This kid had parents who didn't care about him. Obviously, he had a serious problem. He was constantly on social media. Again, US-based social media platforms who do not allow Thailand to monitor and pull out content they think is toxic for their own population. They don't get to choose how their information space is structured. Silicon Valley and Washington get to do that. And so this kid was talking about killing people. Where did he get money? He had no job. So where is he getting money to buy guns illegally? And how did he pay to go to the firing range to use it? And so, again, it is, you get rid of family, you get rid of traditional values, and yes, your society is going to go down the drain. It's very predictable. It has happened many times throughout history. If you read philosophy, religion, doesn't matter. This group, that group, they've all talked about it all throughout history. If you turn your back on family, respect, humanity, your society goes down the tubes. And so
religion,
segment,
yeah.
And Thailand has, or at least they had, their media has been infiltrated and taken over, education infiltrated and taken over, and people are being poisoned against their institutions, their history, their culture, their family, and they go out and they shoot people because they're detached from reality, They're obsessed with violence, and that's what happens.
It reminds me of the last discussion we had on the last Sunday. Actually, that's what Alex said from Christopher. He said clearly, this is isolation of individual. So you don't, when you don't believe in family, you're just on your own. No family, no nation. You're from nowhere. You own nothing. You have no religion. That's what link you to something. You need to have something to hold on to. That's the existence. I mean, this is philosophy, but that's the existential question. Why? Why do you wake up in the morning when you don't have those things that hold you, the foundation of who you are, and you don't know that, you don't know those existential problems, but you lost. You actually do stupid things, violence, criminal, you drugs, decadence. And that's the problem we have in the West. Again, it's not about saying this is bad, but why would you want to export that? People, especially, I mean, we see that in Asia, they don't want that. In Africa, the same. And we talk about 85% of the world. They don't want that.
And this kid wasn't like engineered by the U.S. embassy to do this. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But the sewer that the U.S. is deliberately trying to transform Thai culture into, that creates an environment where people like this pop out. So it's a more indirect process, but it is a deliberate process. They know that this is going to happen. I saw someone say that Thailand's famous for its red light district. If you go to Thailand, if you go to Bangkok, there's like 2 streets in the whole city. It's like 12 million people in the city. There's like 2 streets where there's red light stuff for tourists.
I confirm.
Yeah, and Thailand is a huge country. It's got like almost 70 million people, and its main economic activity is not even tourism. It's industry and agriculture. Tourism now is a very large component, but that's only recently because of the Chinese tourists coming. Before that, many years, Thailand had a very average percentage of its GDP. The global average. It was around the global average for tourism before that. And then these Chinese tourists surged in. That's what bumped it up to such a huge part of the GDP, but it's still not the biggest part of the GDP. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about Thailand. And I don't blame anyone. We all grew up saturated by Western media, which creates extreme ignorance in all regards. And we have to very deliberately look into all of these things. And there's a lot of things that we just take for granted that we're ignorant about until we come across facts or we come across someone challenging our conceptions. But
Brian, I think it was an interesting discussion. Well, let's try to do something on Wednesday. Maybe we can go back to let's see what happened. These days, a lot of things might happen. I mean, news are coming out by the day. A lot of things will happen. Maybe by Wednesday could be a good time just to get back to this topic, Brian.
Yes, that'll be great. Have Angelo on my channel again, like the good old days. I try to, I'm trying to do live streams every week. I used to do them on Friday, but now you're doing yours on Sunday. I'll do mine on Wednesday so we can kind of space it out a little bit. All right. So yeah, thanks for having me on, Angelo.
Thanks to everybody for watching. And you can follow Brian on the new Atlas, and we'll get back to you for live stream next week. Thank you.
Bye.